had a lot to say about Portland's weird, antiquated commission form of government that gives our commissioners a lot of work to do.
If we could switch our form of government, it would be more effective. It would lead to a more, in fact, cohesive city council working towards the benefit of the whole city.
And speaking of commissioners, Portland City Commissioner Dan Ryan is going through it this week. One of his Safe Rest Village sites for the homeless turned out to be in a floodplain. And before that, he told us this.
You go to a meeting in Eugene and they're celebrating all of the openings of the campuses across the University of Oregon, but one, and that's in Old Town. Not because of COVID, because people don't feel safe.
But the U of O is saying, no, that's not true. We're open for classes. Here's the story.
Oh, Old Town, Old Town. Let's talk about it tonight. Let's talk about it. We're talking about a bunch of stuff, all right? I've been looking at emails, responding to what we can, incorporating what we can into the show, but that's what this is all about. We want to hear from you and help us kind of build our rundown every night. What do you want to see the news cover here in your city, in your state, in your region? Let us know. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram or use Twitter and the hashtag #HeyDan. Let's get started. For tonight's big story, let's get back to the charter party, should we? You're like, no. I'm like, yeah, we should. Last night, I force-fed you information about Portland's antiquated form of government with the anticipation of every TV and live stream turning off simultaneously as people with pitchforks surrounded KGW to protest boring television. But to my surprise, you actually seem to value it, maybe even like it. A lot of you had follow-up questions, so we're going to get into a few of those tonight. You know, sometimes I feel like if high school me met right now me, that he'd try to like shove me into a locker, which of course he'd fail at doing because of my old man strength. But regardless, here we are. Steve emailed me and said, I do wonder if changing to a non-commission style government might be a lot more expensive. And the answer is, Steve, yes, it would be a lot more expensive. But before we get into the details and all that stuff, why don't we do a quick, tiny little recap just to get everybody on the same page, up to speed here. Right now, the Charter Commission is meeting to discuss how the city of Portland works, and they're considering a change to our commission style of city government. Portland is the only major city in the country that still uses a commission style, meaning that all four commissioners and the mayor, they run on citywide elections instead of representing districts, right? And they all have tons of power, more than most commissioners or council people do, because on top of voting for and making laws, they also run the city bureaus like police and fire and transportation and housing, etc. Now, last night we heard from Professor Mark Steffen from Washington State, who's working with City Club to make recommendations to the Charter Commission, and he thinks that it's time for a change.
The overall perspective was that if we could switch our form of government, it would be more effective. It would lead to a more, in fact, cohesive city council working towards the benefit of the whole city, and it would better represent the interests of the whole city.
I'm already starting to lose you. Stay with me. All right, because now you're going, all right, we got Professor Mark and the City Club and the Charter Commission, and they're presenting to the commissioners. Who are these people? What does this have to do with me? You're thinking, who cares? And I'm saying, you should care a lot. Okay, because the Charter Party bus stops with you. The only way there's a real change to what happens to this city is if you vote on it. So I want you to know about this stuff. Shove me into a locker if you can. Now, let's get back to Steve's email. I do wonder if changing to a non-commission style government might be more expensive.
My sense is that education and outreach, which is going to be a priority in Portland, would take time and money both, right? So there'd be a lot of money going into making those switches. There'd also be money that would need to be spent on administrative costs and just reorienting the council towards legislative functions and then elevating people that have been, the second in command at bureaus into being the top of command. So yes, I mean, there's going to be some administrative costs here. The long-term, I think, hope was that this would actually pay for itself, that it would pay for itself in terms of more responsive and efficient government. That would be the goal. That would be the goal, actually.
I think you just answered my follow-up, but what would you say to people who look at the expense of all this as a deterrent for making the change?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is what I'd say to them is, what's it worth to have a more responsive government? What's it worth to have better representation of all the citizens of Portland? Is it worth spending maybe hundreds of thousands, millions more over a span of years, I would say, to get to that point? And if people say, no, we got to save every single penny, then I would say, okay, then we're going to trade off better government and a little more money up front for money saved and a government that's not functioning as well as it could.
Now, one new expense that would most likely come with the change would be the hiring of a city manager. Right now, Portland doesn't have one. The city manager would manage the city. It's pretty self-explanatory. But what would that job pay? I don't know exactly, but I can tell you that in the 2020-2021 fiscal year, our city commissioner's salary was $125,694, and the job of mayor paid $149,261. So a city manager, I guess, would probably make something in that ballpark. I know that Beaverton's new city manager has a salary of $180,000 a year, and I say new because Beaverton actually just created that position, leaving Portland as the only major city in Oregon without one, which leads me to this question from Linda. She said, hey, Dan, Beaverton is in the process of switching over right now from a mayor to a city manager. Perhaps a story on how that is going. Now, just to be clear, Beaverton still has a mayor who is not this person you see in the picture there. That's the old mayor. I digress. Adding the city manager doesn't get rid of the mayor. It just adds some new responsibilities to these jobs. Voters approved this during the 2020 primary election. It also moved the mayor into a voting member of the city council and added some term limits to everybody. But the question is, how is all that going?
I think it has been an adjustment for Beaverton, and it has come with, I'd say, as much sort of just time cost of figuring out how to do things as it is. And so that's, time is money. So on some level, yes, some costs go into this, but it's about adjusting to a new way of interacting for the council, interacting with the mayor and the city manager. And yeah, it's not necessarily like you snap a finger and it's changed overnight. It's going to take some time, no matter where it happens.
It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be cheap. But did you think it was going to be either of those things? After all, maybe we should just reach out to Beaverton and say, how's it going? And maybe we'll do that. That's something we might do next if you're still into this story. You are, right? I mean, it's important stuff. If you have questions, first you can check out some of our coverage from last night. You can see that on our YouTube channel. Also, you can find a link on my Facebook page. I go into a bit more detail about Portland's current style of government. Trust me, it's interesting. Believe me. Also, send us your questions, as you always do, and we'll do our best to answer them. All right, so we made it to Thursday night. The week is almost over. We got one more day left, and then it's the weekend. And it has been a long week. And there's one person in Portland who probably cannot wait for it to be over. Which brings us to our new segment, Who is Having a Week? So today, or this week, it's Portland City Commissioner Dan Ryan. His office has been working to get those new Safe Rest Village sites off the ground, and it looked like they were making some progress, right? They announced that 3 of the sites were set to open by the end of the year. And while we heard the normal, not in my backyard backlash, it did seem like the locations were set until they sent someone down there to actually put their eyes on the location, specifically the one at Southeast 45th and Harney, where it turned out it was at risk of being underwater. The site is in a floodplain with wetlands all around it. This sign right there says, please don't feed the ducks. The city admitted that no one checked out to see if the site was in a floodplain or not, and now they're not going to use it as a city-run homeless camp. And Dan Ryan's office is back to the drawing board. So, embarrassing, sure, yeah, but in the long run, not the hugest deal in the world. They just need to pick a new spot and hopefully get those villages off the ground, hopefully dry ground by the end of the year like they promised. But before the mocking tweets had died down on that story, another one came out stemming from an interview that he did on Straight Talk last week with Laurel Porter.
You go to a meeting in Eugene and they're celebrating all of the openings of the campuses across the University of Oregon, but one, and that's in Old Town. Not because of COVID, because people don't feel safe. I have to serve my city if it's the last thing I do while I'm alive.
But it turns out the Old Town campus did open. The University of Oregon came back and said, quote, classes for fall term did begin as scheduled, and the University of Oregon's Portland campus is open for in-person classes. But Ryan wasn't entirely off base because there is a plan there to double some of their staff at the Old Town campus that has now been paused, and safety has been a concern. They said to us, what you see on your screen, safety and security is a top priority for the university, and the UO has implemented increased safety measures for the Portland campus. Now, it's clear to anybody, that safety issues are an issue in Old Town. We've talked about that a lot lately. You can see our coverage on it in the KGW YouTube page. Commissioner Ryan's office didn't correct his statement about the campuses being closed, but he did say this: the only story here is that the University of Oregon is struggling to fully reopen due to safety concerns in Old Town, and that numerous downtown businesses, especially in Old Town, are experiencing the same challenge. Hey, it has been, a while, I think, since we talked about the Portland Trailblazers. Yes, Damian Lillard is still on the team. No, he's not demanding a trade yet. I can say these things now. I'm almost out of your hair, Portland. You don't have to put up with me for much longer. Anyway, with less than 2 weeks to go until their season officially starts, the Blazers coaching staff is going to be a little short-staffed. That's because an assistant coach who was once an NBA player himself today became one of nearly 20 former players facing federal charges in a health fraud scheme. Here's Tim Gordon.
Stretch to defense, knock it down.
It is not a great day to be a Blazer, especially if you are assistant coach Milt Palacio, seen here sitting behind head coach Chauncey Billups at this week's first preseason game. Palacio is a former player and one of 18 who the FBI and federal prosecutors in New York say filed $3.9 million in false claims to the NBA's health and welfare benefit plan. The plan paid out $2.5 million, according to investigators.
The defendants charged today defrauded the plan when they falsely made claims for reimbursement of medical and dental services that they had not received.
The league has taken hits like this over the years, and it needs to try and escape that image of players as lawbreakers, quite frankly.
Dwight Jaynes has covered the NBA and Portland Trailblazers for more than 40 years, so he knows the history, including the Jailblazers years.
Van Exel knocked it away, stole it though.
3 Portland players from that era are also charged in this fraud scheme. They are Sebastian Telfair, who played here from 2004 to 06, Darius Miles, who played for Portland those same years, and Ruben Patterson, a Blazer from 2001 to 06. From guns to drugs to domestic violence, all 3 players had some trouble with team rules and the law.
Patterson for the two-handed dunk.
So it can't be that big a surprise that these guys were involved in something shady. Again, they haven't been convicted of anything, but with the Jailblazers, that was a legitimate thing. There were players on that team that weren't necessarily great citizens.
And this isn't the kind of blast from the past that the Trailblazers want, I'm sure.
No.
As for current assistant coach Palacio, the Blazers released a statement saying in part, "We are aware of charges as they have become publicly available in the alleged health insurance fraud case. Palacio has been placed on administrative leave by the organization pending further notice." For a team trying to get a fresh start, this is not good. But Jaynes takes some comfort knowing the Jailblazer days are long over.
And I think they do a great job of vetting their players before they obtain them. And they have a good group. And I certainly would hope that people don't assume that this kind of stuff is associated with their current roster.
And Jaynes hopes the NBA keeps working with players, teaching them to better manage their millions so they don't go broke and get into trouble.
Case in point, Darius Miles, who made more than $60 million playing basketball and had to file for bankruptcy several years ago. Now, it's important to note this type of healthcare fraud is not uncommon, but because this is the NBA, it got our attention. And in this case, a lot of those former players have turned themselves in. 13 of 18 are in federal custody. Tim Gordon, KGW News.
This morning, the Oregon Supreme Court made a decision for one inmate that could mean everyone who's on the state's death row is no longer facing the death penalty.
So it is my expectation that every death sentence in Oregon will be overturned as a result of this morning's ruling.
When the story continues.
Welcome back. Always good with your questions and comments during the break. Please keep sending them to the story at kgw.com or use hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. Also, don't forget about our Hey Help campaign. This is a big deal for us. We really like doing this, and the people in the community, all of our viewers have responded so hugely to this. This week, we are asking you to please consider donating to Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women USA. They're an organization based in Oregon that work to find Indigenous women. Your donations help them to spread the word about missing Native women, and they pay for the basic supplies and needs of families who have lost a loved one. If you want to help them out, just hold the camera on your phone to the QR code on your screen. It'll take you to a donation page. You can also go to kgw.com/heyhelp. And of course, this is something we do each week to a different organization that we think is doing some great work in our area that you should know about. And if you would like, you could possibly donate to and help. And it's a micro donation drive. So please feel free to give any amount of money, no matter how small. It all helps. Now, Oregon officially has the death penalty. But after a ruling this morning, we may not have anyone actually on death row for much longer. The Oregon Supreme Court decided to vacate the sentence. That means it's no longer being imposed for this man, David Bartol, was sentenced to death back in 2016. He was in jail for other crimes when he killed another inmate back in 2013. I mean, it was serious stuff. The murder was pretty gruesome. He used a homemade knife and stabbed the man in the eye. But it wasn't bad enough to meet the death penalty standard under the law Oregon passed in 2019. Now that law, State Bill 1013, narrows the definition of aggravated murder. That's the conviction that you must have to be eligible for the death penalty in Oregon. Now, under the new law, to be convicted of aggravated murder, you have to have killed someone younger than 14, or a law enforcement officer, or committed an act of terrorism that killed more than 2 people. Prison killings also fall under that umbrella, but only if they're done by someone who is already convicted of murder. So, when the law passed, everyone who had been convicted of aggravated murder got their conviction reclassified as first-degree murder. And the Supreme Court ruled this morning that one of those people, David Bartol, can't be eligible for the death penalty anymore. They ruled that it's cruel and unusual punishment. We talked to Jeff Ellis, an attorney with the Oregon Capital Resource Center, about this.
His crime of conviction has been reclassified by the legislature as murder in the first degree, and the court found that it was unconstitutional and cruel to execute someone for a crime that is no longer eligible for execution.
Now, the court's ruling only applies to David Bartol right now, but the implications are that anyone who has had their crime reclassified as first-degree murder would be able to get off of death row and be resentenced.
So it is my expectation that every death sentence in Oregon will be overturned as a result of this morning's ruling. The court simply said it doesn't matter when you commit your crime or when, more importantly, when you're sentenced for that crime. If you're on the list that's now been downgraded to first-degree murder, then you cannot be subject to the death penalty, even if your crime predates that change.
Now, this doesn't abolish the death penalty entirely in Oregon. Going forward, if someone commits one of those crimes that now falls under aggravated murder, they can still be eligible for it. But Oregon has had a moratorium on evictions since 2011. We don't even keep lethal injection drugs in stock, and there aren't many people who are in the state who are even trained to use them. Oregon has actually flip-flopped on the death penalty for most of the last 150 years. It's been repealed and reinstated several different times, and no one has been executed in this state since 1997. But the death penalty is written into the state's constitution. So in order for it to be completely abolished, a referendum would have to go in front of voters. So you would have to vote to abolish it. There is a man who has spent nearly 2 decades on death row in Oregon, and he has a chance for freedom, not just from the death penalty, but from prison altogether. The Oregon Court of Appeals ordered a new trial in his case, and Catherine Cook has a look at the years-long effort to clear his name.
It's an incredible feeling. I mean, this case is once in a lifetime. He's been fighting this case for, more than 20 years.
Attorney Ryan O'Connor is thrilled for his client, Jesse Lee Johnson. In 2004, Johnson was convicted and sentenced to death in the 1998 murder of Harriet Thompson. The mother of 5 was found stabbed to death in her Salem apartment. While Johnson admitted he'd been to Thompson's home before, he always maintained his innocence. And on Wednesday, the Oregon Court of Appeals reversed his murder conviction and ordered a retrial.
I had a chance to talk with him earlier today, but he was very happy, very excited, and looking forward to hopefully being released from prison.
The appeals court based their decision on a key witness account from a woman named Patricia Hubbard. At the time of the murder, she lived across the street from Thompson. Hubbard says she heard screams and saw a white man with long hair running from the scene. Johnson showed up later. But Johnson's original defense team never interviewed Hubbard. Neither did police.
It was the case that kept us up at night. We all believed that Jesse Johnson was just the wrong guy.
Eric Mason is a private legal investigator. He's been working on this case for years, along with the Oregon Innocence Project. He tracked down Patricia Hubbard and got her witness account to the appeals court.
The first thing that jumps out at you is you have an African-American client on death row, and you know, wow, something's wrong here. And that is the person that obviously was running from the house that morning is not the same race as the person that's been accused and convicted.
Reached by phone, Patricia Hubbard told us, quote, "I'm excited for Jesse. As long as fairness comes to the gentleman that it needs to go to, that's what's important to me." Patricia's old roommate, Teresa, still lives in the same home. She's anxious to see what happens.
20 years. Yeah, that's a long time to take from somebody's life if they are truly innocent.
Exactly what happens next is unclear. Oregon Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum could appeal the ruling to the state Supreme Court. A spokesperson for Rosenblum tells KGW they haven't decided if they'll seek further review or not. Beyond that, O'Connor says the Marion County DA could order a new trial or even dismiss charges.
Hopeful that we can see this all the way through to him actually being released from prison and being given his liberty back.
Catherine Cook, KGW News.
All right, stay with us. Stick around after the break. Keep sending in some questions and comments. I'm going to address a few when we finish the story next. Hey, welcome back. Jeez, I just lost an email that I wanted to read, but I'll get back to it in 1 second. First of all, somebody wrote in and complimented my jacket. Thank you very much. Some people don't like this jacket. They think it looks a little strange with the plaid and everything. I like it because it has these elbow pads. It makes me feel smart. I got this one from Dan, talking about how the city government is set up. Dan, why not have representatives from each neighborhood? So that's the idea of the form of government that might end up being proposed, which is to break up the city into districts. Right now, all of our commissioners are voted upon by everybody. So everybody gets to vote on who the mayor is and who all the 4 commissioners are. But when you have districts, you have each little pocket that represent kind of different needs and desires from the city and what they need. And they have one person represent each one of them. And then those people propose things that work for those districts, and the entire council votes to see if that would work for the entire city, or if it's something that maybe can happen for that one district to help some certain concerns that they have there. So that's one of the changes that are being proposed. But there's a lot of different alternatives. It's a bunch. We might get into that. So if there's still interest, keep having the questions come to me and I'll keep answering them. Also, Bill wrote in and said, Dan, my wife just told me that you are leaving Portland. We'll miss your show. No idea of when you're leaving, but any time is too soon. First of all, thank you so much. It's been such an honor to be in the city doing the story and the news here at KGW, everything that we've all been through together. My last day on the air is next Thursday. You can find all the details on my Facebook page and my Instagram account if you're interested and you want to check that out. But one thing is incorrect about this statement. You said, we will miss your show. First of all, not my show. If you look, they took my name off it already, first of all. Second of all, it's your show and it's KGW's show. And I'm just the person up here who gets to be in front of the camera. But a lot of people put this together. A lot of really talented people helped us come up with it and launch it and help it grow to what it is today. And I'm the only one who's not sticking around. So trust me, the show's not going anywhere. You're just gonna not have to stare at this jacket anymore. All right, thanks for being with us. See you back here to close out the week tomorrow.